Hello, everybody. I hope you can hear me, and welcome to Fear 2000 and A Career in Fear, in conversation with director, writer, and academic Aislinn Clarke and Dan Martin of 13 Finger FX. Before we start and before I introduce our guests, just a couple of ground rules. Cameras off, microphones off. That would be really brilliant. You can use the text chat, of course, and if you've got any questions at the end, just type them in after the interview and Aislinn will relay them. But before we start, both Clarke and Martin have fantastic and growing reputations in the genre. But before we finish the introduction, the pair recently collaborated on the short Eye Exam. If everyone wants to spend a few minutes enjoying it before we begin, I suggest making sure your cameras and audios are off now, and then clicking on the link that is in the chat any second. It is in the chat now. It's a 3-minute long short, so enjoy it. And we'll see you in 3 minutes' time on the other side. And most of us should be back in the room now, I guess. I hope so. Just want to introduce our guests. Aislinn Clarke's debut feature, The Devil's Doorway, attracted international acclaim and drew festival crowds together in praise. A genuinely scary film because its horrors are both supernatural and grounded in reality. She was the first woman to write and direct a horror feature in Northern Ireland. Dan Martin is shocked, surprised, scared, scarred, alarmed us all with his artistry as a leading special makeup effects designer. We've been startled by his work recently in Possessor, In the Earth, and in films like Borderlands, Sightseers, and the outrageously challenging Human Centipede 2, as well as the recent festival hit Broadcast Signal Intrusion, which will no doubt be inspiring papers next year. In this event, Clarke will moderate a discussion with Martin on his career in special effects, his experiences of working on some of the finest horror films of recent years, and the importance of practical magic in a digital age. So with that said, it's over to Dan Martin and Aislinn Clarke.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello. Hi, how are you doing? Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you.
I actually have a little friend here. I couldn't do this and not bring him back.
Hey.
This is our friend who I've christened Eyeball. It seemed appropriate, and I'm very fond of him. He lives in my office. I've got a little headstand for him, and he inspires me daily. So thank you so much for making him for me. I love him very much.
Not at all. It was a fun job.
Yeah. So I was thinking about. I was watching some other interviews with you earlier on and reading articles and stuff like that, and I was thinking kind of, well, I'll start it like this. So for me, I got into horror films as a kid in the 80s, watching movies with my dad, and I remember distinctly watching Nightmare on Elm Street when I was like 7. I was way too young to watch that, but I was loving it. And to me at that age, I had no comprehension of acting or directing or any of all of the various elements that go into making a film. I really just thought that the actors made it up as they went along, and it was like really elaborate playing, like I liked to play. I had dolls and action figures and stuff, and I thought this was just like a real grown-up version of doing that. And I think that's the moment when I thought that's what I want to do. I had no idea how to do it, but I knew I wanted to do it. And I think actually now that I'm an adult and I do that, it is actually quite like that. It is like playing with real live action figures. But for you, was there a moment, was there a monster or some kind of creation that you saw and you thought, I want to do that? Like what hooked you in?
I'm not sure what the actual effect was, but when I was quite young, my mother had a go at the headmaster of my school, my secondary school. I think I was about like maybe 12. 11 or 12, and they didn't want me to take One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest out of the library because it had a red dot on the spine, which meant it was only for the older kids. And my mum went
makes
in.
it all more attractive.
Yeah, exactly. My mum went in and tore a strip off him, saying, he's a child who wants to read, and you're meant to be an educator. What the hell do you think you're doing, standing between him and a book? And so after a bit of back and forth, they decided that they'd put a special sticker on my library card that meant I was allowed the books reserved for the older kids. The second book I got out of the library was A History of Monsters in Film. And the red sticker also allowed you a certain amount of photocopy privileges. So I photocopied every monster out of that book and wallpapered my room in these creatures. At the time, I was a bit of a magic nerd, and this was like discovering that, oh, so magic's not just like a thing on its own. You can also do it for this reason. Like, these things are magic tricks. You know, you're fooling a willing audience, an audience who's going to put aside, you know, incredulity. And that felt like just an amazing thing to do. And it was around about the same time that the grown-ups in my life were asking me what I wanted to be when I was older. And so when I said I want to make monsters for film, a lot of them were very dismissive. A lot of them said, well, that's not really a realistic career.
You shocked me. They didn't say, oh wow, we're so proud of you, son. Let us invest in this career of yours.
Yeah, I mean, I think my parents were pleasantly supportive, but because they just, you know, they're nice lefty parents and they wanted an artist for a child. But the more sort of straight-laced people, especially because I'd just come back to school after having been expelled from a different school, I think they saw me as a troublemaker, and so they told me that that was stupid and that wasn't a real career. And I pointed out that they had a book in the library that was dedicated entirely to this being a career, and they were clearly stupid. And so their disapproval just spurred me on, I think.
Yes, which it would do, and I'm glad that it did. I think the link between magic, I think it's interesting that you talk about magic. As a child, I was kind of into magic too. I never had the coveted magic set. I don't know if it was a thing in the Republic of Ireland in the 80s, but you would see them on TV and stuff. Like, you get a little like stick. Did you have one of those?
I don't know if it was that exact brand, but yeah, I had a couple of the little like off the shelf magic sets. But again, you know, supportive parents. When I was, I mean, like in my memory, I was older than this, but I think logically I must have been sort of like between 9 and 11. There would occasionally be magic in like a youth center, or, you know, you could go and do a day. And I got taken to one in Salisbury with my mother because she wanted to go. She's an architectural historian. She was going to see a building there, and I just got left at this like social center for the afternoon, and I was the only kid that turned up. So I got 6 hours of one-on-one close-up magic tutorial with this guy, and I was just doing, you know, like little coin tricks, card tricks, sleight of hand stuff. I think that was one of the places where I was like, oh my God, there's so much scope to this.
Yes, and I think you're absolutely correct when you say that practical effects in particular are like magic tricks. The purpose being not so much to trick the audience, but to create a sense of magic, I guess.
Yeah.
Of something impossible happening right now. And I think that's the beauty of it.
Yeah. The difference is with film, you have to stick within, like, depending on genre, obviously there are always exceptions to these things, you have to stick within the realm of what feels realistic in the world that you've been handed by the director and the writers and the actors. They create a reality that you occupy, and so you have to tailor what you're building to fit within that. So it could be totally outlandish, but it has to fit within the rules of the universe that you're showing.
Yes, yeah. So for example, in something like The Color Out of Space,
Yeah,
you're creating this very and apologies to anybody who hasn't seen any of the films that we're going to reference, because there are going to be spoilers and it's just
light
impossible to have a
spoilers.
conversation without it. But yeah, you're creating this kind of impossible being that wouldn't exist on our planet, but within the context of the world that Richard Stanley has created. This
Exactly.
is logical.
Yeah. So yeah, when you're in the design, like in the pre-production, the design space, I've always thought it was very important to talk about why the decisions are being made, rather than just, oh, this looks cool, let's do that, or oh, I like this, let's do something a bit like that. There has to be a structural logic running all the way through these things, because they're, ultimately they're there to serve the story, and if they're not commensurate with that, then they're going to stand out, they're going to feel awkward.
Yes, absolutely. And I really appreciate your attention to detail in that respect. I know when we were working on creating my friend Eyeball here for eye exam, and we had a conversation, even though they're actually, when the Cyclopses are only in it very, like, a tiny flash, but we had a conversation about who they are, what is their deal, what kind of Cyclopses are they? they're not just a generic. There's a sense of personality and character. And I remember saying to you that I didn't feel like they were bad guys. I felt like they are doing what we do. We go to other places and have done always, and we would do it now. Human beings. I mean, if we need something, and these creatures need eyes, they need eyeballs. So they have issues of their own, and it's not about being evil per se.
Yeah.
And he has a great sense of empathy in his face, I think.
But yeah, he's the one who's recently undergone the eye transplant, so
Yeah.
he knows what's going. But I mean, there are humans out there with pig aorta in their chests. It
Exactly.
wasn't that long ago that we were using animal parts for transplant. So
Exactly, yeah. So I really did appreciate that in the process of working with you, and also in your other work, because I've heard you talk about how if a director wants a certain kind of visceral gore type effect, that you give them more even than what they think that they want, because it's there to be used, and then the film kind of finds its appropriate space.
yeah, exactly. I mean, you have to find a fine line between making things that are never going to be used and therefore it's a waste of money, but also you have to give the director space to find it in the edit. If you give them absolutely at the level that they request, and then when they're in the edit they wish they had 10% more, you can end up costing them the version of the film the version of the scene they end up wanting. So yeah, you have to it's better to have a little bit extra and not need it than need it and not have it.
Absolutely. I think that's very smart. So it seems like at the minute you're doing absolutely everything. It's like every single horror film that's interesting, that's making a buzz, whatever, it's like special effects. Dan Martin, your name comes up. And in light of also with the title of this talk today, do you think there is something of a renaissance for practical effects?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Possessor aside, that's kind of a unique example, but everything else, it's very rare that everything is purely practical effects. And I've been working long enough now, and to some extent I have to Ben Wheatley to thank for this, but I understand the workflow, if not the actual like minutiae of VFX and post-production, that I can design with that stuff in mind, or I can design in tandem with the VFX supervisor. So when I was a teenager, my father sort of used this parallel to talk about practical versus digital effects, because this is when digital effects were first sort of booming and everyone was talking about how exciting they were and how practical effects might not be worth getting into as a career. And my dad said back in the old days, the old analog faced watches with a thing. And then in the 80s, everyone got into their Casio like calculator watches and the digital side, and everyone thought that they were cool. And a decade went, then pretty much everyone went back to having the analog face watches again, except that now they were run inside by the quartz that had been developed for the digital watches. And it was that marriage of technology that carried us through for decades. Now, yeah, obviously we all have smartwatches now, and maybe in the future something's going to change with effects. But I think at the moment, it's that hybrid that's really hitting the sweet spot. As long as you pick the right tool for the job. Possessor was exciting because right from the beginning we knew we weren't going to have any digital effects in it, and it was always, everything had to be practical. Brandon was incredibly sort of open and considerate about how we approached it, knowing that was a big ask. And so if something really couldn't be achieved without a sort of digital assist, he'd just change it. Like he was very, very accommodating, and it allowed us to do something really exciting. But everything else, I think you don't want to throw out half your tools. You just have to use the right tool.
Yeah, I think that's very practical and smart. In terms of Brandon Cronenberg and his aversion to using digital effects, do you think that's because his dad would give out to him at the Christmas dinner table?
I don't know. I've not talked to Brendan about his dad very much. And actually, they're both filming at the moment. They're both filming a movie, although not in the same place. So I do wonder what that's like. But no, I mean, Brandon's always been very very conscious and very open about the fact that he's not particularly concerned about the idea of legacy. he's, he's obviously working within both a media and a genre that his father is very famous for. And even though there are parallels to be drawn between his work and his father's work, I still think that they're quite uniquely his. And I'd actually say that I think his writing is more Ballardian than Cronenbergian, even though there's obviously a crossover there.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure he gets that all the time. Like
Yeah, I
they,
mean, it's inescapable.
yeah. I think the work is very different though as well. So, it would have to be, I guess, in the context. But in light of thinking about practical effects and how there seems to be they're having a moment for sure right now. I think everybody, well, I think it's been the case for a long time, pretty much since digital effects became commonly used. All the horror fans were always saying, I hate digital effects. Anything with CGI is terrible, practical effects all the way, which I agree with to a certain extent, but like yourself, I think there's a right tool for the job in
Yeah.
certain context. It makes sense, or it's practical to use something else, or to do it digitally, or sometimes the practical is the way, depending on what it actually is. But at the minute, it does seem like a lot of people are leaning into that. And I was just wondering, is there particular things? I'll put it like this: what is your like autumn winter 2021 collection? What are you most making? Is there a whole lot of like head explosions, or like is there some kind of a trend happening?
I mean, the perennial go-to is fake penises. So many fake penises.
The thing,
No,
like,
yeah, I mean it's constant, but I mean we've got quite a library now, so we don't often need to put tool to clay for penises these days.
and if you ever go out of business in this line, then you can always start up on alternatives.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you do get these kind of zeitgeisty feels, I think that there are comparisons to be drawn between broadcast signal and censor. I think that, often you get these things that kind of come in twos and threes. I find that fungal narratives are quite big at the moment. Obviously, In the Earth had fungal stuff in it, but I've read other scripts and worked on other stuff that plays with that idea. And I think it's partly because we're like, with online information and social media and so on, we're all kind of drawing from the same well in a way that previous generations weren't. So you get these little like social nets where people were talking about the same stuff, but that wouldn't be worldwide. But now it's really hard. My wife and I were talking about this the other day. I can't remember what we were watching, but someone was talking about kintsugi, the Japanese like art of taking something broken, like broken ceramics, and fixing it with golden lacquer or gold,
Yeah.
gold. And kintsugi is used in Japanese culture, but also now in pretty much every script as a metaphor for something that is beautiful because of the wear and tear and the breakages it's suffered through, and yet it survives, it strives on, and now it's this more beautiful thing. And we were saying, oh God, it's in everything now. And I think the thing is, as soon as you start seeing like TikTok videos on Instagram that feature a thing, it's no longer a cool novelty to put in your script.
I'd say that's pretty fair observation, all right. Yeah. Once it's out there already and
Yeah.
you can recognize it as a zeitgeist, that means that it's already had its moment.
Yeah,
Do you
exactly.
think that's the case for fake penises?
No, I mean, like I said, they're perennial. They're not going anywhere.
You just never get tired. So, I feel like I saw an interview with you where you talked about having had to make something like 110 penises for one film.
Yeah, very early
Is that a
on.
nightmare I had, or is that real?
No,
Real.
that's real. That was for a director called Oscar Sharp, who's a good friend of mine now, lives in LA. Did a short film early in his career called Fauna, in which a penis grows out of the ground. So there you go, penises and fungus
There's a bit of
crossing over right there, beginning of my career. And after his wife cuckolds him with it, the angered husband runs over it with a lawnmower. But everywhere the blood lands, penises grow.
I
So
can only presume that he deserved it, but I haven't seen the film, so
it's very oblique.
It does sound like that, all right. Yes. So when, like, for we made eye exam, I got to keep eyeball, which I was delighted about. Um, do people keep souvenirs? Like, I mean, what I'm really thinking about here is what happened to the 110 penises? Like, are they recyclable? Does this guy have them in his house? Do you turn them into an art piece?
So the main penis, like the hero, the high detail one, actually ended up getting reused in Harley's crash jumpers, for a scene in which Harley's character is masturbating in the film. So the same fake penis was used for that. The sort of background penises were just hollow latex skins, and they were bagged up and stored, but it doesn't last very long. And I think the majority of them just died, so without ever being reused.
R.I.P.
Rest in penis.
So in kind of slightly moving on from that, but maybe not moving on from that at all whatsoever, what is your favorite thing to do, or is there something that you've done in particular which you loved, and even though you only got to do it once, it was the best time ever? Or is there something that you get to do a lot of that you really enjoy, and it's, you know, something you look forward to?
It's the novelty that keeps me excited, the problem solving, figuring out how to do something for the first time, or doing it in a different way because of the way in which it's going to be filmed, or the restrictions of the movie, which sometimes are just down to budget. But yeah, the problem solving has always been my favorite bit. So when someone comes to me and says, you did this thing well, I would like you to do it again, it's less exciting than when someone says, no one's ever done this, I want this to be done, it's impossible, please make it possible.
And so give me an example of that.
Oh, I mean, it's, to be honest, it like, so when Brandon and I were talking about the Sean Bean scene in Possessor, I was immediately very excited about that, and was like, okay, so we've got like a bunch of different effects that we're going to edit together, so we're going to do it in a bunch of different ways. So we sat down with Karim Hussein, his incredible cinematographer, and went through the shots that he wanted and all the different angles. And I'm okay, so here it's a fake poker and a real Sean Bean, and here it's a fake Sean Bean and a real poker, and we're going to have fake teeth in this sequence and real teeth in this sequence. We've got a different poker here that can deliver blood because it's hidden, like a bloodline is built into it. So we were creating the sequence from Brandon's storyboards with a different effect for every shot, pretty much. And obviously in edit that gets mixed up a little bit, and maybe an effect will be used more than once, but the excitement of coming at that ground up and designing a different mechanism for every shot. The internal mechs on the Sean puppet were very, very simple, but I mean, I don't know if they're completely unique, because I haven't seen the internals of every puppet that every other effects artist have ever made, but I've drawn on that for something that I'm doing with Brandon at the moment. And again, talking about the physical digital divide, I do stuff in like previs in digital now. I'll do a creature design digitally, or as I did for something recently, or in this instance, I'm designing mechanisms and systems in CAD that will get 3D printed or machined out, and then go inside a traditionally built skin to allow that kind of movement. And it's just about it's about prioritizing stuff, because we're always working with a finite budget, especially in genre cinema. And so I think that's where the challenge is working out where to spend it, where to hide things, because like magic, it's often about misdirection. It's about making sure the audience is looking at the right thing at the right time.
Yeah. And just for clarity for people watching, you're talking about the scene in Possessor where Sean Bean gets beaten.
I am, yes. I was just being a little oblique.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
so we had a full-size puppet of Sean. We did multiple life casts of Sean, passive life casts for him to be for us to sculpt prosthetics onto, expressive life casts that would allow us to make puppets of him in those poses. And then we also made prop versions of the pokers and all that kind of stuff, which the art department over in Toronto were sourcing the heroes of. Yeah, it was really fun. Like so like a unique thing about the Sean puppet, it was going to get teeth knocked out. So we designed all of the teeth. They were rigid acrylic teeth in rubber gums, and they were held in place by very short brazed steel rods that pierced into the gums. And to be able to get them back out of the mouth to reset, I essentially built one of those fishing games where we had a magnet on a string. Because of the steel rods, I could just fish them out of the mouth and then pop them back in for give them a wipe down and go for another take. But it meant that we could bash those teeth out again and again.
Fantastic. Yeah, I can see how it's very much a problem-solving game, and also there's no template for what you do really. It's just every time
I
there's a
mean,
oh, sorry, did I get froze up there?
no, you're all good.
Oh, good. Okay. Every time it's a new challenge, some director says to you, I want you to do this crazy new thing, and you're building that from the ground up. There's no like how-to book. You know, you had your book of the greatest monsters when you were a kid, but there's no like, how do you do this? So that was just all, you just learned all that on the job. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, like I was very lucky with the people that I met early in my career. I met some people who are very generous with the information that they had accrued. And there were some texts out there, like Tom Savini had released a couple of pretty good books, the Grand Illusions 1 and 2, which were very much a sort of Blue Peter effects guide, like how to cook foam latex in your home oven, and fantastic drawings that he'd done of how they'd hide a body underneath a rubber raft, or push a skewer Kevin Bacon's neck, or whatever. So you definitely get a little bit of a leap there. And nowadays, there's an amazing amount of information out there. If someone wants to get into effects, Todd Debrachini has written 2 fantastic books on makeup effects. The Stan Winston School of Character Arts, which is an online facility, has an astonishing amount of information out there. But I mean, obviously, the best thing you can do is just to do it and to play around with it.
Yeah, and particularly because you never know what you're going to get. You can be
Yeah.
handed with any kind of a task. And so my next question probably is partly answered by this, maybe, or maybe it isn't. And that was going to be, what is the most difficult thing that you've had to do? And I've kind of got the feeling now that the most difficult thing is probably also your favorite thing.
Yeah, I mean, like as far as the thing I have to talk people out of when they haven't got a lot of money is always hair. hair is
Yeah, okay.
Hair is expensive. Well, because there's 3 different ways of putting hair on. You can do, well, 4 if you count just wrapping it in bought fur. You can flock it, which is using static electricity to fire very short hairs at the surface so they stand on end in glue. And that's fine for sort of up to about a centimeter long, but anything longer than that is not great. There's fur transfer, which means sort of using a combination of tape and spray glue and shaving it off something and transferring it to something else. And then there's hair punching, which means individually inserting every hair one at a time. And all of those are very labor intensive, and all of them are very slow. And most of them are quite delicate as well, even on the finished thing. So when someone says, oh, I want a creature and I'd like it to be
like a werewolf or something.
Yeah, well, this is why you see so few good low-budget werewolf films. And when you do see werewolf films, they're invariably actually quite sparsely haired, because it
That's
doesn't
a really
make...
good point, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, the stuff that Rick did for Wolfman, the practical suits that they built for that were unbelievably beautiful, and they had a huge team of hair punchers punching those suits like day and night for months, and they're absolutely beautiful, and it shows. But that's why they look like that. Like, whatever you think of the film aside, those are beautiful effects. The suits are beautiful, but they're just so cost ineffective, so incredibly labor intensive.
Yeah, I never actually considered that before, but I was actually just talking to someone the other day about it. Why are there not more werewolf films? And now I guess we know it's probably partly because of that, how expensive it is. I saw you tweet the other day that you were doing something with Velcro that you hate doing. What's that all about? Is that hair?
No, I just hate sewing. I was putting straps on masks, and I had to stitch Velcro to webbing, and I hate sewing Velcro. I mean, I don't like sewing at the best of times.
Underlings that you can get to sew things for you now at this stage.
Yeah, it was because I was out of country, and it was a patch job, so I was on my own.
So obviously you're a very artistic guy, hands-on, you can do loads of stuff. Like, I know that you found the monster book and you were like, I want to do this, and you knew that from a young age. How did you actually get into doing it? Like, what was your first gig? And I'm guessing that you did art in school heavily, and clearly you're a good artist, a really great artist as well. So what was the journey? How did it start?
Well, my actual education, my sort of before higher education, my education was a bit spotty because of expulsion and so on. And they lost quite a lot of my coursework for my art GCSE, which did not stand me when I moved schools, which didn't do me very well. So I failed art GCSE. But to be honest, the best skill at that point in my life was tenacity. Every time I heard whisper of someone who knew someone who was involved in film in any capacity, but particularly in special effects, I would chase it down. When I was in my teens, a friend of mine was making short films. This was the first guy I knew who was making short films. Until then, I'd been shooting my own stuff on like Digital 8 or High 8, and just roping my friends in and you know, saying, okay, I lived in Winchester, and there's a semi-abandoned military base just outside the city. So we'd go and we'd film in these derelict military buildings and, you know, run around in, you know, stupid wraparound sunglasses doing matrixy stuff.
We've all been there. We've all been there.
Yeah, exactly. But then he knew someone who was his day job was shooting like sort of GV footage of Southampton, which was just down the road, for a shopping centre that had these big screens installed, and they just wanted constant stuff playing. And so but he had this kit, so they were making short films. One of the films, his upstairs neighbour was a pyrotechnician. So I was like, right, well, I need to meet your upstairs neighbor. And I ended up assisting him on a couple of things. And he like taught me through making distillation units and like the basics of pyrotechnics. And I did go on to train and get my license in explosives and that kind of stuff, which I don't do anymore because I find it absolutely terrifying. Like if I get something wrong, an irreplaceable bit of costume has some blood on it. If a pyrotechnician gets something wrong,
yes,
you know, that could go very, very bad.
In my experience, the pyrotechnician people on set are always the kind of loose cannon kind of guys who are running around that just really love starting fires, you know. And I think you have to have that kind of.
Don't get me wrong, I love starting fires, but
I would not want to misrepresent you on that.
Yeah, front. I'm just not going to risk a film for it.
Yeah, fair enough. I think there are a couple of lessons there for people in your story of coming along. One is that you can fail your GCSE art and still have a career as a really successful career as an artist. You know, I think that's super cool, and especially for younger people to hear that. And the other thing being tenacious, just sticking on it, because it's the same for me. It was like you know, I grew up in the Republic of Ireland and nobody was making films. Like we had a 30-year civil war and all that kind of thing, and there was very little film industry. I moved north when I was a kid, and yeah, it was the same thing. Just be super tenacious, sticking at things, using any contacts you could get. And I think that's, you just keep beating at the wall and eventually it'll fall down, you know. And I think there's a lesson in that for anyone who's thinking about getting into the industry or wondering how. I think there's no magic way except keep going.
Yeah.
And that from your story.
Absolutely. I one thing I've found now, and maybe this is just me being sour and old, is that the sort of tenacity has to some extent been replaced with a sort of fake it till you make it attitude. And I come across not a lot, that's not fair. I come across quite a few sort of young makers and artists who want to get into special effects, who talk as though they act as though they know everything, which is not good. Like, it's totally okay not to be amazing at the beginning of your career. No one was.
Yeah. I think that comes from insecurity, especially if there's people that want to impress you and they want you to think they're real professionals and all that kind of thing.
I think to some extent it's a knock-on effect of social media and like the way everyone has to put all their art out there for everyone to see all the time, and there's less space to self-reflect on stuff. Like, you know, I look back at stuff I did last year and I'm like, God damn it, I'd have done that differently. You know, you should never be in a position where you're fully satisfied with the work you're producing, because that's where that's when you start to stagnate. But also I think to some extent it's being taught. I think that kids are being told, oh, you know, you've got to have this kind of bravado, this idea that, you know, just tell people you're brilliant constantly.
Yeah, and they'll believe it. Yeah. I think social media is a big part of that also, in that you have a very skewed sense of other people's success, because again, you're only seeing the kind of packaged final thing. Nobody puts up their failures for the most part, and I think that's
Yeah, of
probably
course.
where that's coming from.
Well, they do, but they dub them successes.
Well, yeah, I suppose there's a wee bit of magic in that too, being able
Yeah,
to repackage something
but
as
like
success.
I've got 3 recent graduates, two who graduated this year and one who graduated last year, and then I've got one second year degree student in as a trainee. She's with us for another week and then goes back to university, and they're absolutely fantastic. But one of the things I really value about a lot of them is if they don't know how to do something, they will come and ask me.
Yeah.
Like they'll say, "Oh,
Way
just
you
to check,
learn.
is this
Yeah.
correct?"
Yeah, absolutely. It's the only way you learn, especially with something as practical and detailed as the kind of work that you do. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's really important that I don't know why people feel that they can't, that it just looks like failure if they ask for help. But
Yeah, exactly. Like I always feel maybe I shouldn't say this out loud. I always feel it's really good for someone to fuck up really badly quite early on when they come to your studio, because it like that gives you the opportunity to show them that you're not going to be mad about it, that it's just a thing
yeah,
and
so
you'll
you're not
fix
going to
it and
fire
it's
them
fine.
and,
Exactly.
go
Like
crazy.
I was very, very lucky to go and work for the Jim Henson's Creature Workshop pretty soon after university. And I started with them on Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and then went on to do a few other projects with them as well. And my boss, I was in the mold shop there. My boss was an incredible woman called Karen Purvis. And day like 2 or 3, I was given a pretty simple task that I misjudged and that led to me spending twice the amount of time undoing. And I was so certain I was going to be told, "Oh, don't worry about coming back. You're all good. I was just a junior." And she was so kind about it and so accepting. And I tried to sort of follow that method of employing people, of talking to people who work under you, because at the end of the day, it's just a film.
Yeah.
It'll be
Yeah.
okay. We like nothing goes smoothly at any point in filmmaking.
Yeah,
From beginning to
absolutely.
end.
So the amount of things. Yeah, you have to have a good sense of humor and you have to be
Yeah.
chill, I think. I hear
Yeah.
about because I'm a director, so I'm not on anybody else's set and you're on other people's sets all the time. But I hear about really tense, argumentative kind of sets and where everybody's like shitting themselves constantly. And I just wonder how on earth they get anything done, to be honest, I don't know how that functions. Because as
Yeah.
well as anything, when somebody makes a mistake, when it's something like you're talking about, and you learn a lot about how good that person is from how they fix the mistake, from what they're doing, like how they're managing the situation. You learn a lot about who they are and whether or not you want to work with them going forward and so on by how people respond to stress and stuff that has to be dealt with right now. So
Yeah, absolutely. I've always maintained that actually being able to do the job in film is only about 50% of the hireability, and the other 50% is how well you're going to work with a team, how nice you are, all those things. Because at the end of the day, you're going to be living out of each other's pocket a month, 2 months. You have to be able to get on. If someone makes you feel uneasy, or if someone has a head trigger temper, it's not going to make things smooth.
yeah.
I have the job I'm on at the moment is shooting over in Hungary, and I'm sort of back and forth at the moment. And I have my key prosthetics artist and sort of de facto supervisor over there is a woman by the name of Tracy Loader, and I don't think she'll watch this, but she is amazing. And one of the things, quite aside from her just incredible skill as an artist, is that she's one of the most chill people I've ever worked with. She is unflappable. Like if Scary Tracy comes out, everything has to be on fire. Like there's no there's no way that those are the big guns. But even then, like stuff can be going seriously wrong, and she's just quiet, looking for a solution, not adding any extra tension, not adding any extra like stress. And I think that's so important to be able to do that, because we've all been in those departments where you've got someone who's complaining constantly, and it just brings a real down energy to everything.
Totally. I think people who can just stay chill, especially like, I mean, it's not a house burning down, it's not a ship sinking, it's a film and it will get fixed. I think people who can keep a cool head, stay chill, and just keep a calm vibe are absolutely
Yeah.
worth their weight in gold on a film set. I love those people, they're the best. before we move on to audience questions, I want to talk to you about, because when we originally had the conversation about doing this conversation and we started to talk about sound, and Chris was like, save this for the actual conversation. And it is something that I'm super interested in. I'm really into sound. I've done a lot of audio work in the past, and when I'm making my films, I'm always like really, really keenly aware of what's happening with sound. And you mentioned working, or well, on I think it's Ben Wheatley's films. You have Martin Pavey doing the sound, and how much that really helps to, because the effect is, and I think sound is really interesting actually, because it's the I think it's the most important and most overlooked element of a
Oh,
film.
yeah.
People never actually really think about it unless they're really working with it themselves. The audience very often are largely unaware of the effect that the sound is having, unless it's not there. If it's bad, you might not even know it's the sound. You just know there's something really wrong with this. I don't like
Yeah,
it.
yeah. You can watch a movie with shitty image quality, and as long as the sound's good, you're with it for the whole thing. But it doesn't matter how good a film looks. If you can't hear what's going on, if it's uncomfortable to listen to, if the sound's bad, it just kills it. And like you're saying, sometimes it doesn't even have to be that obvious. You can just too much, too constant a score, too loud a score, not enough sound design, empty spaces sound wise can absolutely tank a film. Like bad sound can ruin a good movie, and great sound can elevate a very bad movie.
Fully agreed. And I think especially when it comes to practical effects, gore, any kind of like injury type sequence or anything like that, the sound is completely crucial. Because even if you've never seen someone get beat to death with a poker, you know whether or not this is right. Your brain knows, and on some fundamental level, your body knows, and it just feels wrong.
Yeah, it's about finding something that people find uncomfortable for sound. And Martin's a wonderful collaborator and insists on rolling sound on practical effects because he wants to hear what the actual puppets sound like. So sometimes he can't use it because there's motors whirring or like mechanics clicking away or whatever. But sometimes there's a lovely squish that he'll be able to sample out of it and use in the final thing. But then also I'll get phone calls from him saying, "Oh, I'm doing this. What do you think would be a good way of creating this sound?" My degree had a section on Foley, and then when my wife did her master's at USC, they were rebuilding the Foley suite, like the original Jack Foley suite. And I got to go and sort of walk around that as well, and see all of his like space. And it's just amazing. Like it is the world of film. It's the thing that makes it real. It sells it. And that very much so for special effects. Like again, is it Alex Rider? Is that the name of the kids movie with the child spy? I think it's called Alex Rider. That might be wrong, but there was this kids spy movie in the UK in early thousands, I think, and they submitted it, and I think it maybe even got an 18. It definitely got a 15 rating. No, kids film to do is change this, and it was because when they'd mixed the sound for it, people were getting their necks snapped, they were crunching, and then they just remixed the sound and they took out all the breaking bone noises and all the like groans and cries of the people who've fallen out of shot bleeding out, and suddenly it was a PG.
That's incredible. Yeah, it just exists on this level that I think that's what's so fascinating about it. It's because the audience, for the most part, unless they're really into sound and they know a lot about it, it's not the thing that they're going to pick on. It's not the thing that the people are going to comment on Twitter or whatever, but it is the thing that will absolutely make or break the film. And actually, when I met my husband, he was doing Foley for radio. So I've spent some time in those like BBC Foley studios and stuff like that. And I've seen all of the different ways that this was probably a big part actually of my falling in love with sound. I think all the different ways that sounds are created and how counterintuitive certain things are. I'm sure that Martin Pavey probably, if you have like an eyeball getting gouged out, it's not going to be what you think it is. It's going to be something that's generally actually really innocuous. It's like a grapefruit in a spoon or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, Martin's Foley work is great. I think Martin's genius lies in the final mix, the design. I know, for example, that he had a load of the audio for Possessor, and I may be slightly misdescribing this because, you know, I wasn't part of it, but it was my understanding that for Possessor, for some of the sequences to represent the sort of the dual psyche, the person within a person psychologically for that film, they'd mix a scene and then they'd play it to Brandon with reverb mics inside his mouth so they could pick up the sound through his skull.
Wow.
And they'd filter the sound for the movie back. So you know how, like, when you hear yourself on a tape recorder, that's not how you hear yourself, and it's because you have this additional reverberation of your jaw and all the way up into your ear bones, and it filtered everything through a certain degree of that to create this internalized variant of the soundscape for the film. And I think just ideas like that are worth their weight in gold.
Yes, I absolutely live for that stuff. I love that kind of thing. In iExam, actually, there was this little object that we created for that was like we call the ice scoop. It doesn't
Yeah.
exist. In case anyone's worried, there's no application. You bring an ice scoop out. We just invented it, and the art department made this kind of contraption that was half ice cream scoop and like claw or whatever.
Like a
And
whisk.
yes, like it was like a sort of yeah, an egg whisk kind of thing. And but it made this like particular sound that was quite kind of visceral and sort of sharp and ice scoopy. And then when the person who did the score for the film, that was Dee Hex, and I got her to mix in. I was like, "Can you use this percussively? I want to have this ice scoop. I want it to make it." Because I think on some level that the audience recognize it, some part of your brain. I think your ears are smarter than you are even, and they pick up on stuff, and some part of you goes ice scoop, and it just gives you this little level of uneasiness, or that's the design or the hope anyway. But all of that is absolutely endlessly fascinating to me.
But that's it. I think the visual stuff is predominantly conscious, the way we take it in. The audio stuff exists much more in the subconscious, and that's where you can really trick people. And that's why a different sound effect can sell or break a practical effect. You know, a practical effect that's technically very efficient with the wrong sound effect doesn't work. You know, you could show the same brutal decapitation with a very, very well done bit of sound design and then like a comedy sproing to different people, and they'll have completely different reactions because so much of it is based in the sound. But if you ask them what they thought of the practical effect rather than what they thought of the sound, they'll give you very different answers because they won't have processed. I mean, you know, maybe the sproing is an exaggeration, but you know, they're unlikely to have processed that it's actually the sound giving so much of that feeling.
Yeah, 100%. It's kind of like, to go full circle to our conversation at the beginning about magic. It's almost like misdirection.
Yeah.
That the people think that they are engaging with this head explosion or whatever it is, a person getting beaten to death, and they think that's what they're judging, but actually so much of it is in what they're hearing and what they're not looking at. It's like the magician saying, you know, look over here and not at my hand.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, like, you know, just to once again point out that everybody else just exists to make me look good on these films. It's the same with editing, you know, like how you cut a special effect in, like the pacing of a scene, where that jump comes in if it's going to be a jump, where the reveal comes in if it's going to be a reveal. It's all down to the edit. And again, you know, I think what it comes down to is that it's all working together.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, as a director, I'm keenly aware that a film is something that's made by a whole bunch of
Oh
people,
yeah.
and a whole bunch of people that are extremely good if you're lucky at what they do.
It
And
takes a
that's,
village.
it don't really does. And that is the joy in it for me. It's in getting to work with people like you, and getting to work with brilliant like cinematographers that I admire, or people in sound that I admire, and actors, and it's getting all these people together to work on your wee thing that you have in your head and seeing it come to life. And that's such a massive privilege, you know? So thank you, Dan.
Oh, thank you.
You do. Such a pleasure to work with you on iExam and to chat with you again today. And I guess we should take a look at some of these. We've got quite a few questions popping through.
I've been monitoring the questions that have popped into the feed, and I've captured a few of them on my mobile phone. So if I take any photos of the screen. So I'm going to pick them out just because, before we get any new questions. I'm going to pick out some of the ones that popped in there earliest, and ask the writers of the questions whether or not they want to ask them themselves. Ariel Basker, you've asked your question twice. You're so keen to get it answered. So do you want to ask it, or do you want me to read it?
I can ask it if that's okay.
That's really cool.
Is that all right?
Yeah,
so,
okay, go for it.
So my question was, in your collaboration, how exactly do you work out what can be handled practically and what actually requires a special effect, and how much of your time do you spend weighing dogged determination to get something right with wasting other people's time on set potentially?
Well, so I think and this isn't necessarily the same for all effects artists, but the way I work is I get given a script, I line it out, like I read the whole thing once, I read it again and highlight everything that I think could be an effect. And then I put together a document that ostensibly says, if you just don't care about money and you want everything to be as expensive as possible, these are all the things, these are all the places you could spend money on effects. And then the first pass of that follow-up conversations with the director, where he'll say, well, actually, no, we don't need to see that, that's not so important, but this is really important, and I'd love to see how you do this. And then I'll have a conversation with the producer and we'll work out what kind of budget we're looking at, what we're aiming for. And then with that in mind, I'll go away and I'll do the breakdown. And it's one of the reasons I've never thought that it's possible for effects artists to have agents, because like an agent can't work out how much something's going to cost, because to work out how much something's going to cost, you have to work out how you're going to do it. And to work out how you're going to do it, you have to be the effects designer. So agents don't make any sense. So I'll come in, but I'll have, you know, as part of that conversation with the director, I'll be saying, okay, so like how, like what aesthetic do you want? Like, so when I was working on CENSOR, obviously Prano wanted everything to feel like a late 70s, early 80s horror movie. And so we were working within that. And actually we went to quite a lot of lengths to like restrict the methods that we were using for those effects so that they could feel commensurate with that era, but also keep them at the level that a modern film needs, because it can, even though you're dealing with 70s stuff, if we showed some effects that looked like they were from a few of those movies that we were referencing, they would not fly with modern audiences, as much as I love those movies. So yeah, once you've worked out what you're making, once you've worked out what it's got to look like, once you've worked out how much you can spend, then you start working out how you're going to do it. And again, like just through experience now, I've got a pretty quick fire answer as to how I think these things should be approached. And then the fine tuning comes in the next stage after that. So I'll say, okay, well, I think actually this should probably be a puppet here. So we'll shoot that with a puppet, but we can sell it by doing this with the actor first. And then it comes down to how they're going to photograph it, all of the minutiae. And so it's just a really like evolved process all the way through the pre-production and often well into production as well. And then the final thing is going to be the producer coming in and saying, no, you have to make it for half that and throw all this out. I hope that answers your question. No.
Thank you. I've got another question, this one from Laura Mee. Laura, I don't know if you want to ask it or I'll ask it on your behalf if you like.
I'm all right, Chris, I don't mind asking.
That's awesome.
Cool. Hello.
Hello.
Hi, thanks so much both. I'm loving this chat, and thanks Ash for never making me want to go back to Specsavers again. I just wanted to ask Dan, why do you think this kind of reverence for practical effects has sort of re-emerged? I mean, I guess it's possible that it never really went away, especially within the horror genre, but is it a generational thing? So is it filmmakers returning to aesthetics they grew up with, or is it part of the sort of contemporary retro trend for 70s and 80s, or is it about kind of celebrating those effects maestros like Savini or Bottin or somebody or something else? Or
I think it's quite a mix of all of those things. VFX, when it, like digital effects, CGI specifically, when it hit it was new, it was exciting, everyone was like, oh well, this is the future, we're going to do it. And I don't know how many of those very, very early digital effects movies you remember, but they were terrible. And the ones that have stood the test of time are the ones where they pick their battles, and normally they mix practical and digital really efficiently. Jurassic Park, Terminator 2, there's way more practical effects in there than people perhaps realize now looking back on them, thinking of them as these sort of benchmarks in digital effects. James Cameron started out in practical effects. He was a matte painter. He worked in effects. So he really had an idea of how to approach these things. I think the only effects, like practical effects, like job that's been killed by digital is matte painting. The other thing is that the push as time digital effects became probably a producer-led push. Directors have preferred practical effects for a long time. One of the big advantages of digital effects is that you can change your mind up until like a week before the premiere. So, you know, you might have heard stories of some of the Marvel movies redoing their effects. Obviously, the Hobbit movies were redesigning like orcs like weeks before the premiere, like completely painting over practical effects that they'd already done. So one of the advantages of digital work is that you have all this post-production time to kind of tweak it and change it and test audience it and all that kind of stuff. With practical effects, you have to get it on the day. But I would also say that that's one of the advantages of practical effects, because you know what you've got to work with. You know, going into edit, you know exactly what you've got, and you're not, unless you have huge like weta cache and can afford Gollum with his like 7 layers of red you know, it's probably not going to be that great when you have CGI. It's computer generated imagery that's the problem. VFX is fantastic. Compositing, you know, erasing the top of someone's head when it comes into shot because they're puppeteering something. Like, you know, if you watch RoboCop, you can see the top of Rob Bottin's head when Ed 209 is shooting up the guy in the boardroom, like peeking up above the table on the miniature city. So like those kind of things are an easy scrub these days. But VFX serves well when it's working on areas of the screen that people aren't necessarily looking at. So when you've got a big spectacle and everyone's going to be all eyes on, if it's digital and it's anything other than absolutely flawless, it immediately feels fake. Whereas if you have a practical puppet, even if it's not absolutely perfect, it's never not going to feel tangible because it's a real thing and it's in that space and it's under those lights. And even if you know in your heart of hearts that it's a rubber thing with someone's hand up it, it's still a real thing. It's still a tangible thing. So yeah, I think that that's probably the reason that audiences go back to it, particularly for practical effects and like genre stuff. But then also, like you said, there is this nostalgia thing. And I think that within the genre space, a lot of directors who are making films now were growing up in that sort of heyday of 70s and 80s horror. And so we are seeing this love of practical effects sort of come back to the fore.
Yeah, just to kind of feed into that, I think there's a sense of, what you kind of touch on there, Dan, there's a sense of just genuine honesty to a practical effect that people are a little bit more suspicious of a digital effect. It feels naturally more constructed.
Yeah,
it just feels like that. So they forgive more. So even though you see you can tell that it's a puppet, or you can tell that that's latex, you forgive more in the dodgy practical effect, because you know that real workmanship and hands-on craft has gone into that. There's a sense of just honesty to it. I think that people like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like, so in CENSOR, which I mentioned earlier, there's a decapitation, which we based on the big decapitation in Romano Scavallini's Nightmares on a Damaged Brain. And so we used the same practical method to achieve it. So we had that kind of nostalgia built in, but we used modern materials rather than these very flat, opaque, cheap foams that they were using then. We're using silicons and, you know, all that kind of stuff. So it's about finding that middle space between those two aesthetics.
Yeah, which worked out brilliantly, I think. Looks great.
Amazing. Thank you both.
Thank you. I've got a question, or 2 questions really, or maybe it's a 2-part question from Benny Chinnery. Do you want me to ask them, Benny, or yep, you go for it?
Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah, no, it's no problem. Yeah, so the first one was just how challenging was the process of doing special effects by proxy in Host?
It it was really exciting. I mean, I knew it was always going to be quite minimal. Like, we weren't going to be able to have these actors, like, you know, build huge creature suits or anything like that. And actually, James Swanton, who plays the demon in it, did all his own makeup. I had nothing to do with that. I can't take any of his glory for that stuff. But we'd been working with like 3D transfers and that kind of stuff for a while, and they're very popular with makeup artists who are not like true prostheticians. They, you know, because you can keep them in kit, they're quite small, they're easy to transport, they're very quick to put on. They're a fantastic thing to have in kit for adjustment. And so they were an obvious choice for this sort of like destroyed face makeup that we were doing. And then also talking to Rob, we knew that we were going to be using VFX or at least digital editing to hide edit, so we could transition different makeups in. So ostensibly, it's just several different makeups, each building on the former, to create that look for that, you know, for the keyboard scene. So I made the pieces. I sent a bunch of demo pieces over to the actress. We had a long Zoom chat where I talked her through her application. She was using Zoom like a mirror to put these pieces on, and I was talking to her about like, okay, so astringe the skin like this, then, you know, push it on like this, blend the edges like this. She was absolutely fantastic. Like, she completely got blood application, which is a whole thing, so that's great. And then when we shot the scenes, I was on a hidden window in the Zoom call, and it was really smooth. It was really, really fun.
Awesome. It looks really good in the film, so yeah, it you know, clearly works. The other question was, am I correct in thinking that it was the final sequence in the Borderlands or Final Prayer that you worked on? And if that's the case, how did it feel working on such a very suddenly visceral and stressful sequence in what had been quite an understated film up to that point?
Well, I do have stuff all the way through the film.
Okay.
But I don't know if you know this, but my wife is the producer of the movie.
Right.
So and the ending is ostensibly her rewrite. Like, that was a change she added to the film. And I remember being sat with her in the pub with her and Elliot, talking through the ending of the film, and she was sort of pitching this ending, and I was drawing a cross section of the anatomy of the creature underneath the hill, like going, okay, like this is, I feel like this is how it exists in the space. And that's where it started to take shape. And then she had the script before we shot, had the script rewritten to her spec, and then we shot the movie. We did a first edit. She wrote up specs for some additional scenes to be written, to be cut in. We got a different editor in. So the first edit. Anyway, that's not what you're asking. The point is the ending, like, it was always meant to be this lovely, like, kind of like left turn. But it was, yeah, but we also knew that we were operating within budget. But because I was there at the inception of it, and because she was so like open about all that, we could kind of like, it was this sort of like balancing game of what was happening and what we could do on the budget, working next to each other. But you know, again, as with our conversation about sound and editing earlier, I owe so much of that to sound. I owe so much of, like, again, I think that was Martin Pavey did that one, but also to the actors, which is so fucking good, because that scene only works because of the first 2/3 of the film. That only works because you've really grown quite close to these characters, because they're, you know, two very charismatic men being very sweet, being very funny together. And so that ending is a real gut punch. I think it makes it way more effective than it would have been if it was, you know, if you hadn't cared about those characters like that.
Well, congratulations to the pair of you, because it's an excellent sequence and an excellent film. So yeah,
thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Got a question from Dr. Mark Richard Adams, who says it's entirely a question for himself, but do you want to ask it anyway? You'll regret it if you don't.
Yeah. Go on then. No, I was just. I see you worked on Await Further Instructions. It's a film I adored. The ending effects. I was actually here talking about these films. I thought I had a very technological version of kind of Hellraiser vibe, especially the character Chenard from Hellbound. I was just wondering if you're aware if there was any deliberate influence there.
It wasn't a reference that came up in our conversations about the about the sequence when we were filming it. But I think it's, you know, Hellraiser is such an important film in the genre. It's very difficult to make a film about something where, I mean, so if you step back and talk purely metaphorically, this film is very much about someone who opens a box and doesn't get what they were hoping for. So just in this case, it's a video box. So yeah, I mean, I can definitely see the comparisons there. And as I mentioned earlier about the idea that, yeah, maybe there's not a playbook for effects, but you're always building on what's gone before, and it's no one's making art in a vacuum. So when you put something together like this, I think even if it's not in the consciousness bit of your brain, you can't escape all the things that you've experienced. And if you're going to be influenced by something, why wouldn't it be Hellraiser? Hellraiser is amazing.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got a question from Craig Mann. Is that a made-up name?
No, Craig's real.
Right. So if you want to ask your question about werewolves.
Yeah, predictably, it's about werewolves. I mean, me and Dan we've talked about this via Twitter DM a few times, but I just wondered if you could say more about your experience of working on werewolf designs. You did a werewolf for Blood Moon, right? And you also made a werewolf for a KFC commercial, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Would you like to work on a werewolf film with a decent budget as well?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I want to work on another werewolf movie if it doesn't have a decent budget. Is probably the best way to answer that. I love werewolf movies, and I'll watch a lot of shit werewolf movies on the hopes that I'll find a good werewolf movie. And the thing is, like, I'll take I don't need a particular flavor of werewolf for it to be a good werewolf movie either. Like, I'll have an upright bipedal wolf man. I'll have an all fours running through the werewolf. I'll just a big dog is fine as long as the film is good. That's all right. And I think that's often what people sort of let go of, is that the effects are not the point. Like,
yeah, what
you do, you should do well. Or so terribly that it's great fun. I was talking about this with Censor, but I pulled a similar trick with the KFC commercial where I was like, right, we're not going to use any materials that didn't exist before 1983 or 1984. So we limited ourselves. There's no silicon in that. Like, we were very, very restrictive of ourselves to be able to create this grindhouse aesthetic, because I mean that was RSA, that was Ridley Scott Associates, that's his advertising on. Anyone really knew what the internet was, and when people would come up and be like, "Hi, we'd like to make a viral," we were making this commercial for KFC that would just play on the internet, I guess. But it was really fun, and I got to make loads of rubber hands and heads and crazy digitigrade stilts, and it's really fun. Blood Moon again was exciting. We didn't have as much money. I overreached a little bit, and I think there are some places in the film where you can see that. But again, it was a fun one to be part of. I'm pretty certain we have a world record for the tallest werewolf in that film, but when we asked Guinness to come and officiate it, they basically yawned at us. But that's a 9.5-foot werewolf in that film.
Wow.
Ian White, who played the creature, is 7 foot, I think. He's looked up the creature's throat, and then he's got 13-inch stilts on as well. So he was fucking massive.
Wow.
But I got maybe a little too excited about having this giant creature because it couldn't go through doors. So we had to cheat a lot of that because it does go inside a couple of times. And then also, just through no one's fault, we had like a monsoon of rain just before we shot, and so the entire location was in 6 or 7 inches of mud, which made it impossible to traverse in stilts. So Ian in that film is running around on a raised platform of planks on apple boxes. We had to make him like a gangway wherever he was moving so that he was walking
as well.
Yeah, well, so he'd take the stilts off, but then the gangway would be the height he would be in stilts.
Okay, right. Yes.
So all his movements had to be pre-planned, which took some of the kind of like the playful spontaneity of creature stuff out of it for him as well. So he was a good sport, but I think it probably got a bit dull for him being told exactly where he had to go.
Other than the American Werewolf and the Howling, have you got any personal favorite werewolf designs?
Yeah, I mean, Dog Soldiers is a sort of go-to, and it's one of the best, like, semi-modern now, hardly modern anymore, British werewolf pictures. I'm As far as transformation goes, the skin off transformation in Company of Wolves has always been a favorite. I absolutely adore it. There's oh my goodness, it's a Spanish film, and I'm trying to remember. I think it's called
Game of Werewolves,
Attack of Werewolves, Game of Werewolves. Yeah. It's the I think the Spanish title is something a bit more interesting.
It's like Lobos de Arga or something like that.
The Wolves of Arga.
Yeah.
But that's a really fun one, and again, those are good suits. And it's a good fun, like, comedy horror werewolf film as well. I watched Werewolves Within recently, which I enjoyed. Not a lot of actual werewolf on screen, but a fun comedy horror movie. There's a really fun transformation in Roma Santa, which I like. But then I'm also a big fan of this. Oh my goodness, I may have to tweet it after the chat because I can't remember what it's called. But there's like a crazy Spanish 70s werewolf movie where you start to perhaps realize that the werewolf is a sort of an excuse for a child murderer being hidden by the church, which is just amazing. They just keep letting this guy escort children across the Spanish countryside.
What's your feeling on the big one, American Werewolf in London?
I have my reservations about the director, but the film itself is great.
Yeah, I have to say that bit and again, it's probably partly because the design, I think, was incredible for the time as well, and that transformation sequence is absolutely iconic and always will be. But that moment when the guy is running through the tube station, and we're at the top of the stairs, it's Spank or something, he's way down there.
I can assure you this isn't in the least bit funny. Amusing.
When he comes to the werewolf comes out at the bottom, that is just so beautiful,
so good,
so elegant. I love it. One of my all-time favorite horror moments.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's one of the things that was such a shame about Wolfman, because they fired the director of Wolfman in week 1 and they brought in Joe Johnston to direct it, and Joe Johnston wasn't going to go to bat for all these practical effects that they'd done. Like, that was going to be a hard R. I've got friends who worked on that for months longer than I did, who making these, like, literally making edible bodies, just these amazing things, never got filmed because the director wasn't to the taste of the studio and gave them enough space to fire him in the first week, and they just brought in a gun for hire, and then it became a PG-13 and way more. Like, Rick always said he wouldn't do another werewolf film until digital effects had come far enough that he could marry the two. And actually, during the transformation in the sort of operating room space, there's a shot where you see the thumb dislocate and move down the arm, and that's just such a beautiful bit of design. It's an entirely digital effect. I'm pretty certain it was Rick's bit of writing. Like, Rick was like, we should do this. It's absolutely beautiful, and it wasn't going to happen practically. It was just slightly outside of the reach of the old change-o head mechanisms that he was building for American Werewolf, and it's gorgeous. But unfortunately, the film is terrible.
That's enough werewolf chat from me. I'll let some of the other audience questions go ahead. Thanks very much, Dan. Cheers. We've
got a question from Liam Ball, who doesn't mind me reading it. So there's been a lot of talk recently about the preference for visual effects artists in mainstream Hollywood productions because of practical effects artists tend to be unionized. Is this the case in your experience, or is that a bit of a generalization?
So I would say that's an American thing. The Americans and the Canadians are much better at being unionized. We have Bector in this country, but it's kind of toothless. I am very pro-union, although I do think that some of the sort of militancy that happens in the States with union stuff, and not just in film, but also in film, can be problematic and sort of work against the interests of the people working in film, or work against film in general. But I think ostensibly unions are a very good thing. We don't really have much of that in the UK. The Directors are happy to go VFX over practical effects is because, yeah, the practical effects people will say, well, no, you have to pay us for every hour we work. You have to, look after us and make sure that we're not going to die. VFX studios go out of business constantly. Like, the big talk a few years ago about the Life of Pi, because all those, they just couldn't meet the demands of what they'd sort of been contracted into, and they didn't have a union to back them up. So they made the film, they delivered Oscar-winning special effects, and the company was dissolved before the award was handed over. So yeah, I mean, I think if producers are choosing VFX over practical effects because the digital effects haven't unionized to the level of practical effects, then those producers are terrible people.
Yeah, I think there's also, as you mentioned earlier, there's a heavy element of there being more control for the producer. There's more a perceived sense of more control because you can tweak in post-production.
Absolutely.
Yeah, make more decisions. Whereas once you've done the practical effect, that's what you got. That's what you shot is what you have.
Yeah.
And producers are always going to lean towards anything that gives them a safety area.
Any decision they can make after the test screening.
Yes. Oh, totally. Yeah. Whereas directors are like, this is my vision, I'm sticking to it. It's a genius artistic endeavor. But the producers are always thinking about the final kind of numbers and stuff like that. So.
Yeah, this is the thing. I'm not one of these people that thinks the director's cut is always the best version. There are directors who do not know what they're talking about. And there are some classic films where the producer's cut is better than the director's cut. But also, if the director is the kind of director who will choose a substandard solution to a problem because they can bully a non-unionized workforce, then that is not a producer who has the film's best interests at heart. That is a producer who has the bottom line at heart. And, sometimes that works in line with an artistic vision, but often it surpasses it and can spoil things. Things become amorphous and sort of middle groundy in a way that's not fun. You have to be making a film for an audience. You can't make a film for everybody, because if you make it for everybody, it's flavorless.
Yeah, I fully agree. And I think it's the constant kind of struggle when you're working with particularly people in Hollywood, because of how films are financed over there is so different to how they're financed in the UK. And there is a constant kind of battle between we want as many people as possible to see this, but also this needs to be something that has enough texture for anybody to want to see it. It needs to have a sense of its own spirit, but that's
absolutely. I did a picture for Fox. One of the first bigger budget pictures I did was called Other Side of the Door. Director Johannes Roberts. 42 films were the on the ground producers. Fox were the financial producers. And when I came on board, I'd done a couple of pictures already with Johannes. The first feature I designed, F, was his, called The Expelled in the States. And it was ostensibly a sort of a riff on the Pet Sematary structure. Johannes has written it with a chap called Ernesto Riera, who's a fantastic writer, and all of Johannes's better works are co-written with Ernesto. But when I was given the script, it was a PG-13, so there wasn't a huge. There was a creature, kind of ghost creature in it, and I managed to persuade Fox to let me bring over a Spanish performer who's now pretty famous, Javier Batet, who's an incredible man and a fantastic creature performer, but hadn't really done much in the UK at that point, if anything. And so we started designing this creature, but there wasn't a lot of other stuff. Alexandra Aja came on board as an executive producer, and he really lobbied hard with Fox for it to be an R, and not just an R, but like a hard R. And so about a week before we went over to India to film this thing, I had a new script land in my lap, and they're like, okay, it's an R now. Here's like 1,000 extra things you have to make. So I was flying back and forth to Mumbai through production, like making things and bringing stuff out. And it was like, I was so excited about this new version of the script. Like, it was like, wow, this is what this should be. This is pure horror now. This is really exciting. And then for one reason or another, we ended up cutting a day of filming short. We all got a day, like a half day back at the hotel in Mumbai. Javier had an accident and broke one arm and one leg on the marble steps in a swimming pool on the roof of a Mumbai hotel. And we couldn't shoot the end of the movie. We shot the rest of the film, and Fox took it away and they cut it together and they test screened it, and everyone was like, this is amazing. So I don't know how much our audience are understanding of the test screening process what they do is they put out a call for people to come watch a movie. For instance, they were like, do you like horror films? Come watch a horror film. So all these self-identifying horror people came to see the movie, and they loved it, and they were asked what their favorite bits were, and all this kind of stuff. And it was such positive reviews that Fox went, wow, this is really, like, people really like this. This might have crossover potential. Maybe we should show it to non-horror audiences. So now they did another test screening, but they invited people that weren't horror audiences. They invited people that were just general audiences rather than self-selecting horror fans.
Interesting.
And now the questionnaire had extra questions. And one of those questions was there anything you thought was a bit too much? Was there anything that went too far, would stop you from recommending it? And they were all like, oh, I'm not sure about the bit where the little girl gets possessed and cuts the dog's head off.
That's the best bit.
Yeah, it definitely was the best bit. And suddenly, and then by the time we go back out to India, Javier's healed up. We're shooting the ending. He's all better now. But now the film's a PG-13 again. And it makes me really sad to watch that movie because it could have been a very different film.
Things can get neutered, which is I think audiences don't always understand the difference between American films and European films in that sense.
Yeah.
Because the finance structure in Europe is geared towards we're making art here, or broadly speaking, whereas in the States it's always about the bottom line.
Yeah.
Cinema screens, how many people are going to watch this thing and pay money, so that's how it plays out. We've got a question here, which we probably just about have time for, from Benny again. Unlimited budget. What creature or project would you want to take on?
Life-size Cthulhu.
Oh my God. Don't we all? Yeah. Magnificent.
I don't know. I love tentacles. I'm a big fan of tentacle mechanisms, but they're expensive and they're heavy.
And then it's also Cthulhu, like it's a Lovecraftian, unimaginable beast, which is partly why you want to do it, right?
Yeah, exactly. I remember when Fantastic Fest, no, Beyond Fest, when Beyond Fest showed A Field in England in LA, they gave some of the audience magic mushrooms before the screening. And I feel that the only way you're going to do a perfect Lovecraft movie is practical effects and psychoactive chemicals.
Oh, yeah. Goes without saying, absolutely. Put it into the Pepsi,
Yeah, it'll be like in Nightmare on Elm Street where they go, put on your 3D glasses now. But it's like, drink your small vial of Kool-Aid now.
That's the future. That's the future. We've worked it all out.
And then the hellish soundscape starts to unfold. And here comes Cthulhu.
I'd pay big bucks to see this. Thank you so much, Dan. I think our time is up, and it was really so nice to chat.
Oh, thank you. It was really nice.
Always lovely to chat to you. Always lovely to chat to anybody about horror films. Thank you to everybody in the questions and the audience too for being so cool. And Chris, thanks for having us.
Hey, listen, thank you so much, both of you, Aislinn, Dan, for being our guests and for making this evening so entertaining and interesting. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's our pleasure, both of you. I was going to say, when are you two going to collaborate next?
Well, I mean,
send me scripts.
The next chance I get, I was supposed to be shooting something this year, but with COVID things being the way they were, we decided to kind of take a bit of a rain check on it and push it into next year. So I have been talking to people about you, Dan. I've been saying I have to get Dan Martin on this, that I've been flagging it up. So I'll be sending scripts your way pretty shortly.
Oh, I look forward to it.
So do I. I'm really looking forward to it. Well, thank you so much, everybody. And thanks everyone for coming and asking so many interesting questions as well. We're going to wrap it up. We'll see you back.